Over 100 years ago, two teams of men, the Terra Nova and Fram expeditions, made a bid for the title of First at the South Pole. In a mad dash for the heart of Antarctica, one team won and the other made the ultimate sacrifice. After it was said and done, however, which had the greater lasting impact?
Robert Falcon Scott was an English naval officer born on June 6, 1868, to a wealthy family. From a young age, it was clear his future lay in military service. Almost everyone in his family had served at one point, and by the time Scott was 13, he had already enlisted. In the Royal Navy, it became clear he was a natural sailor and leader, and he quickly climbed the ranks to the position of a middle-ranking officer. However, in 1894, while serving on a submarine, the HMS Vulcan, he learned that his father, John Scott, had sold the family brewery and wasted the money from it in poor investments. This put considerable pressure on Scott, even more so when both John and Scott's brother Archie died only 3 years later, making Scott the sole breadwinner for his family. Desperate for a promotion and the considerable raise which came with it, Scott took a risk. He volunteered for the Discovery expedition with legendary explorer Ernest Shackleton, hoping it would get him noticed and spare his family from poverty. The expedition ended up lasting 3 long, cold years. During this time, the crew made major ecological and zoological findings, as well as Scott himself conducting a trek into the polar plateau, a 1,000-kilometer wide expanse of flat, snow-covered landscape. On his return, Scott was lauded as a hero, and the next 3 years of his life were extremely successful. Scott had achieved what he initially set out to do, and more, and with his financial problems satisfied, he was encouraged and sponsored by the Royal Navy to conduct a research expedition in Antarctica, with reaching the South Pole being a secondary objective, as Ernest Shackleton, Scott's former colleague and rival, had just returned from his near attempt to reach it. However, Scott insisted on making the pole the primary objective of the expedition, in order to secure for the British Empire the honor of this achievement, as he said, and the Navy conceded. In 1910, he was given command of the ship the Terra Nova, which set off for the initial stage of the expedition, while Scott continued campaigning and fundraising in Britain. He would later meet up with the ship in South Africa, where they would set off for Melbourne, Australia, for the first leg of the journey. However, just after they arrived, he received a telegram from renowned explorer Roald Amundsen, which read, "Beg leave to inform you Fram proceeding Antarctic. Amundsen." The Fram being Amundsen's ship. Now, in addition with the problems he already faced with his motorized sledges and ponies, Scott would have to contend with a seasoned explorer. The race was on. From the start, Amundsen had many clear advantages. He started nearly 60 miles closer to the pole than Scott's team, giving him a huge head start. Scott was burdened with the additional objective of scientific research, while Amundsen was focused solely on the South Pole. He used only dogs, while Scott used a combination of dogs, Siberian ponies, and 3 motorized sledges, which cost 7 times more than the dogs and ponies combined. Because of this, Scott's travel plan was needlessly complicated, with specific plans for each method of transport. In contrast, Amundsen's strategy was simple. Similar to a rocket shedding boosters as it ascends into space, his team would kill off the weaker dogs as they approached the pole, using them to feed the other dogs and the men, and, morbid as it may sound, it worked. Amundsen reached the South Pole on December 14th, 1911. Scott's team arrived nearly 5 weeks later, saw the Norwegian colors in Amundsen's tent, planted the Union Jack, took a few pictures, then headed home. They were found some time later in a tent buried under 3 feet of snow, their skin glassy and yellow, unrest and regret still written on Scott's face. They were just 11 miles from an enormous food depot, a sudden storm having stopped them for the night.
Amundsen undoubtedly led the better expedition, with every aspect of it being streamlined and efficient. The singular use of dogs, the simple plan, the one goal of reaching the South Pole. Additionally, Amundsen was already a seasoned explorer and was very well prepared for Antarctica after years trekking the Arctic, while Scott was essentially a rookie with only one failed expedition under his belt. However, his expedition had a far greater impact, one which still affects us today.
Today, Antarctic expeditions are an obscure topic. They seem trivial and uninteresting with the benefit of hindsight. However, it must be considered that these expeditions were the equivalent of space travel at the time, and the South Pole was the moon. They don't call it the golden age of Antarctic exploration for nothing. In a sense, it was the precursor to the space race, and like the astronauts of that era, the explorers who led these missions were celebrities, and Scott was no exception. The impact of these expeditions and these explorers are diminished by us taking their accomplishments for granted. The existence of Antarctica was not even confirmed until 1820, and the mainland was first sighted in 1841. Imagine an entirely new continent being discovered at the bottom of the planet, where previously there was thought to be none. It captured the imagination of the world, and the men who explored it deserve to stand in the halls of history.
Despite his confusing leadership, lack of experience, and questionable methods of transport, Scott was a national hero in Britain, even before his death and after. His status was permanently cemented. His funeral was held in St. Paul's Cathedral and was attended by the King of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and many British elite. 100 years later, his death was still remembered and honored. A service was held for him in 2012, this time attended by another Archbishop and Sir David Attenborough, among others. In fact, at least in Britain, no one really cared about Amundsen's victory. They were swept up in national pride for their hero.
The Terra Nova expedition also had a scientific impact. Research was a secondary objective during the trip, and Scott's research team made meteorological, geological, and zoological finds, much of which formed the foundation for what we now know about Antarctica today.
Robert Scott and Roald Amundsen both conflicted with nature and the harsh, unforgiving Antarctic continent. Scott compromised at the cost of his life, while Amundsen got out alive. Their conflicting goals were never resolved by compromise, but the passage of time, and although Scott may have believed his death was in vain, in the end he accomplished more than his competitor and left a permanent mark on history for it.